Welcome to another eDesign Codemakers tutorial for game design. In this video, we're going to show you how to unleash some of the power of the Unity game engine through code. Let's get started. In order to add code to our Unity project, we need to create something called a script. These scripts contain code that tell our objects what to do. To create a script, you can do this in two different ways. The first way is you'll notice I've created a scripts folder. If you right click inside the folder, go to Create, C# Script, that will create the script that we want. I'm going to name this one Earl Controller because this bit of code is going to tell Earl what to do. In order to get this code directly attached to Earl, we can do this in a couple of different ways. The first way is selecting Earl, selecting our code, dragging it over and letting go. That adds our script right onto Earl without any problems. The other way is you'll notice there's an Add Component button on your inspector. If you click that button, you'll see that you can add scripts or create new scripts depending on what you want to do. Now that our script is attached to Earl, I think we need to add some code to it. In order to add code to it, we just double click either the icon within our inspector, or we can take a look at the icon within our assets folder. Once you double click that, it will open a program called MonoDevelop. MonoDevelop is just a code editor that's attached to Unity and lets us play with the code. Let's take a look at some of the things that are pre-generated here for us. The first bit are the two lines at the top. These two lines are libraries. Libraries are really important to any code that you create because what they do is they have special code that's been already made for you that you can utilize and makes your life a lot easier. A good example is within the Unity engine, there's code for physics. Physics is actually really hard to code on your own because there's a lot of mathematical calculations. So we may as well use some code that someone's already generated for us. The next two things I want to highlight are the start function and the update function. The start function is there to make sure that we can create any actions for objects right at the start of a game. Since this script is going to be attached to Earl, this start function tells Earl what to do when the game begins. The update function is probably the most important function, as this function is attached to what's called a game loop. Game loops are never-ending loops that continually run from when your game starts to when your game ends. This update function tells the object that this script is attached to what to do every time the game updates. As the program is running, you can have some really fancy things going on, like balls bouncing across the screen or making Earl fly. Everything within the update function runs once per frame, and with a game, most games run at about 60 frames a second. So this tells you how often this is updated. So you want to pay really close attention to the code that you put in your update function. Now, I think we're ready to get Earl moving. We already created an animation in a previous video to get Earl walking. But when we start our game, Earl starts out standing still. Well, let's change that. When the game starts, let's make Earl walk. In order to do that, we need to set that flag that we created, which is the walking parameter within our animator. In order to set that, we can actually do that within the start function of our code. Now, let's look at some of the things within the Unity engine library. So when I type in game object, certain things populate right away. You'll notice that there's two different game objects. You need to pay really close attention to which one you're using. This particular game object, the one I've selected, means take a look at the game object that's attached to the object that you are putting your code upon. So in our circumstance, we mean Earl. Now, we want to get at the animator that we've created. So that controller, we need to get at the flag. And there's a very specific way to do that. In order to do that, we actually want to use something called getComponent. GetComponent will allow you to look at any component that is a part of the object that the script is on. In our circumstance, we look at Earl. Earl has an animator component, so we can actually get that. So we started out by adding in some pointy brackets and type in animator. We finish it off with a couple of round brackets because that tells us that we finished a function call. To find out more about function calls and classes and other very specific code things, I highly recommend talking to your instructor. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we need to set that Boolean flag that we created. So, what's great is Unity has already created a setBool function for us. So let's set the bool. Now, when we type in setBool and an open bracket, there's two ways to actually use this function. What's interesting is there's an ID, or we can use something called the string. Because we don't really know what the ID of our parameter is, we're going to take a look at the string because we know that it's called walking. Any string within code always has two quotation marks around it, so make sure that when you're typing in strings, you make sure you have those quotation marks. Otherwise, it won't recognize it as a string. We want to set the value of our code to true, just because that way the program, when it runs, will set our walking parameter to true and Earl will start walking. Make sure you save it by hitting Ctrl S or you can go File Save at the top. Let's see if our code works. If we go back to our Unity game engine, let's leave our animator open and let's hit play. Excellent, our code works. So if we stop playing, you'll notice that everything resets back. We're back to our idle state and Earl isn't walking. Let's see if we can look at that one more time. Excellent. If you were paying attention to the animator at the top, you'll notice that it started on an idle, transitioned to its walk, and our flag has been set. That's everything for this tutorial video. In the next one, we'll show you how to get Earl actually moving forward. Thank you so much for watching our eDesign Codemakers tutorial for game design.